Arvind Sanger is with us, Managing Partner at Geosphere Capital Management. Arvind, good to have you with us here. Prashant this side, thank you for joining us. Global stuff we'll talk and your first reactions there in terms of what we've heard so far. But here in India, there's no... What do you think is the dominant driver? Is it just the cyclical slowdown, earnings slowdown, etc., which is at play? Growth stocks getting smashed, Dixon, Zomato, etc., big corrections yesterday. Or do you think there's some, fears around the budget and taxes, etc. now? Budget's not very far away. Go on.
I think it's a slowdown, and I think it's valuation. You put your finger on two of the most important things. We've been talking about this for several months now on your channel that things were not inexpensive and economy was slowing down. But what is now happening is that the big hits that the companies are taking are starting to move them into interesting ranges. But now, like you said, we have the budget to look forward to or to worry about, depending on your point of view. For us, usually budgets are non-events, but I think in a world where competition for capital is going to get more acute, if the US is more aggressively trying to attract capital and make investment in the US more attractive, both from a tax and regulatory standpoint and from other ways that the government can support it, then it behooves a country like India, which wants to be in that China plus one investment boom, to think about how it can compete for capital and talking about raising capital gains tax and other things. Unfortunately, that stuff will have to go off the table, and pro-growth ideas will have to come to the forefront to compete for capital on a global basis.
Okay. By the way, I just want to talk about some of the quotes that came in from President Trump on immigration, and they were actually quite supportive. So let's see if IT stocks react to this or not. He said when he was asked about H-1B visas and immigration, he said, and I quote, I don't want to stop, and I'm not just talking about engineers, I'm talking about people at all levels. We want competent people coming into our country. So very encouraging statements there that IT companies would definitely want to hold on to. Arvind, hi. So, as a money manager, when you look at the world around you, you have this Make America Great Again sort of endeavor that's taken off. And as of now, the US market's in a roaring mood. So as a dispassionate money manager, do you think the money for the time being in the short term will continue to head to US shores, given our concerns here and some of them you highlighted?
I think US is a safe place in town, but as a value investor, I think the US is getting a little bit overdone in terms of the hype and the short-term expectations. I'm not saying that if you take a 2-3 year views, US growth will not be there, but I think a lot of the good news is discounted. So when I look at it globally, we find more interesting opportunities in some of the left behind, left out sectors. And India was not part of that left out, but is starting to get to where it's moving into more attractive, reasonable valuations. And some of the high flyers, you mentioned a couple just now, Zomato and Dixon getting smashed. But again, I'm not suggesting those companies have suddenly become value stocks. But if we get a little bit more of a pullback here, the growth opportunities for some of these companies versus the PE ratios are getting into a range where they start to get more interesting. So I think India is starting to move into the interesting range. US is starting to get to where maybe it's time to take a little bit of a breather since a lot of good news is being discounted.
All right. Hi, Arvind. Good to hear your thoughts. Arvind, I wanted to ask you about what about the Chinese market? Because there is this fear that Trump won't be as harsh as one would have thought on China. For example, today he's talking about tariffs of close to 10%, but earlier he was talking about 50-60%. Do you think there's a risk that China at these valuations in comparison to an emerging market like India could outperform from here on? Or do you think India is a longer term story? Well, we'll continue to see a decent amount of the flows as well as interest.
Well, China's problem is not Trump tariffs. China's problem is its own demographics, its own youth unemployment, its own bust of real estate. There's so many problems that China has. In fact, there was an expectation that if Trump puts on more severe tariffs, that China might undertake a much more meaningful stimulus. So if Trump doesn't undertake too much of tariffs, then maybe the stimulus is not going to be that large. So I'm not sure if China is not in a lose-lose situation, which doesn't mean that the market is not cheap and it could have a rebound. But like you just said, I don't think there's a structural story in China with or without Trump tariffs that makes us particularly excited for the medium to long term, given their challenges. India has a much more fundamental long-term growth story. But short-term, India has underperformed China for the simple reason that India's valuations got too excessive and China's got cheap. So if you look at the last few months, maybe you could make that case. But going forward, I think China may have a trade, but not a fundamental bet that we are willing to make.
Super.
Arvind, you began by saying we've gotten to a place where things are better, but there's the budget to deal with. So in a way, you're saying that time to look for ideas, things. I mean, event, no event. I mean, the budget is there, but I mean, beyond that, you think time to be a little constructive here?
Yes, as long as the budget doesn't do any harm. And my main point about budgets in India is, don't do harm. And I think the government has done a reasonably good job of not making any big moves in budgets, which is what we like. So I think, we are always looking at companies bottom up in different sectors. And I think, some of the names you've talked about and others, things are starting to get to interesting levels. I won't say that we're jumping in with both feet, but we've started to nibble. And as valuations come down, we're getting more attractive. We've been sitting on cash for a while, and that's being deployed in Indian markets as we see this pullback.
Got it, Arvind. Well, let's see. I mean, the last time around, they announced a hike in capital gains tax. It doesn't get, bigger than that. And yet the market could digest it and move ahead in life. So let's see. Hopefully no more surprises.
That was
a bull market. That was a bull market, yes. Right now, the market psyche is very, very different. It could use some support and some help. And let's see if that comes on the 1st of February. Thank you very much for joining in. Good conversation as always.